Welcome to the Second Half Stewardship podcast. We believe that God owns it all, and our response as Christians is to live generous lives. I'm Spencer Hall, a certified financial planner.
And I am Austin McLaughlin. As former full-time missionaries in the United States and overseas, Spencer and I approach managing our personal finances through the lens of biblical stewardship.
Journey with us as we explore how to be generous stewards of our money, time, relationships, gifts, and experiences.
So Michael, thank you so much for sharing in that last episode about working diligently. If you didn't hear it, we really hope that you go back and listen to it. But one of the things that you mentioned was the story of this family that received help from your church and was really diligent to cut spending, to start living simply, but continue to work really diligently. So this week, we're going to talk about that idea of living simply. And you finished the section on working diligently with this idea that if you do that, there is a likelihood that your lifestyle, or that not necessarily your lifestyle, but your income can grow. And when it grows, oftentimes there's this expectation internally that your lifestyle grows to match the income change. But this idea of living simply kind of runs counterintuitive to that. So when you think about that idea of living simply, what are some key characteristics that you think of?
Yeah, I mean, it is true, Austin. I think it was John Wesley who kind of bemoaned the fact that as revival comes to a place, people begin to work diligently. They begin to be, more, they begin to live more thoughtfully, and that produces some sort of prosperity, and then it makes it difficult to be following after Jesus. So some of these things, it's like, look, it's easy to creep into what the result of working diligence is because we haven't thought much about it. And so I think that what's important is in living simply. Richard Foster shaped my thinking a lot on this. Richard Foster wrote the book Celebration of Discipline. He also wrote a book on simplicity. And so he has a chapter in the Celebration of Discipline on simplicity, but he wrote a whole book on it. And the thing in the chapter and the book he focuses on is it's not so much about how little can I have, how little can I spend, how small of a house can I live in, how old do my shoes get. It's the first place we get to when we think about a principle of living simply is, am I seeking first the kingdom of God? Because when Jesus tells us to seek first the kingdom of God, he does it in a following of do not be anxious about, what you'll eat and what you'll wear and what these things, because God cares for the lilies of the field. He cares for the birds of the air. Is the message. And so it says, instead of seeking after those things, seek first the kingdom of God, and those other things, the simple things really, will be added unto you. And so I think when we begin a conversation of what does it mean to live simply, if I do it from a perspective of frugality, if I do it from a perspective of, I want to, what's the fire, the retire early thing, if I'm doing it from that perspective, I may accomplish something, but I certainly will not be growing towards Christ-likeness. I will be really prone to the dangers of consumerism and consumption and all that attend to having more. And so living simply, I say, really is much more of an attitude of contentment and seeking first the kingdom of God than it would be I can necessarily just look at what kind of car you drive or what kind of shoes you wear and tell you if you're living simply or living simply enough. Would be maybe the other way to say that.
Yeah, so when we think about simplicity, it's not about consumption per se. It's about what is my attitude towards the heart of the Lord and his generosity towards me. How am I responding to a God that has been incredibly generous to me? And am I thankful and responding in joy? Or am I saying, yeah, you're right, I did do all this, God. Now I can take more on and do more and have more toys and those types of things.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. It's it really begins with an attitude, and I probably will desire less as I grow in this. I mean, that's kind of a part of it because I'm not as consumed with thinking that if only I could have this or this much more of this, that would bring me satisfaction. Now, it doesn't preclude me from enjoying things that I might have at all. And I think that's unfortunately a side effect is if I become this really dull person who's like, well, I can't take joy in, eating that food because that would not be me living or finding contentment outside of God. It's actually, as I think C.S. Lewis even points out, is as I become more heavenly minded, as I become more attuned to that, I actually become way more effective and enjoy the things of what God has created here more and can savor and satisfy them even more because I haven't put them in a place that they can't hold to, they can't attain ultimately.
Well, and I think like what you're leading towards is this idea that you really shouldn't live in aestheticism where it's what can I do to have the littlest amount of stuff, nor should it be this desire for I want all the stuff, I want all the good life all the time. It should neither be a life of constant celebration and party and lavishness, nor should it be just I want to be as miserly as possible.
Yeah, I think just, tie that up, that I think that I mentioned a little earlier, I think people tie simplicity to frugality or asceticism, and they're not synonyms. At least how we're using them, they're not.
Right. Yeah. So one of the key questions that you surface in trying to discern how to move forward, as we think about spending decisions, is this question of how does this help me to know God more or join with him in his work? And in the book, you talk about the story where you've got oak trees on your property and they get this disease. And I just think it's such a helpful vignette into your process. At least that one circumstance, as I read it, I was like, oh, this is really helpful to think about. So can you share a little bit more about that story and what was happening at y'all's place?
Yeah, so we live in Austin, Texas, and our house was built probably in the late 70s, and so there's these beautiful oak trees in our neighborhood that are big and kind of frame old houses and make them look beautiful or look better than a 1970s house can look. Beautiful is a little bit of a stretch, but we found out that our trees started to kind of die, and there's a disease called oak wilt. And so we found out our trees had oak wilt and began to kind of look at what we were going to do with them. And one of the decisions is, do you cut them down or do you treat them? And they're both pretty expensive propositions, but and so I began to wrestle with this fact: is this is just indulgence of me liking the aesthetic look of my house and not wanting my big, beautiful trees to die. So I'm willing to spend thousands of dollars to give them medicine to hope that they live, right? It's like, okay, am I treating a tree like an animal or even a child? And so, I was wrestling with this. And as I was wrestling with this, I was actually teaching this content in seminary for the very first time. And so I'm by myself and calling my wife, and she's getting the quotes. And so we're starting to wrestle with, what do we do? Like, what's the right thing to do with our money? Because does it damage our property's value if we don't treat these trees, because now we don't have these beautiful trees on our property, and all these justifications that we try to go through. And then as we were going through it, my wife found out her grandmother who had died left each of the grandkids $10,000, and it was this surprising gift. And so now you think, okay, now we have this money that we could put straight towards those trees, or we could give it away, or we could save towards. So we began to just kind of pray through and wrestle with this. God, what's the quote right thing to do in this situation? If we're trying to honor you with our money, and we don't want to waste our home, but we also don't want to do these other things. And oak wilt's contagious, so if I let it spread, it damages my neighbors. And all of these considerations kind of were swirling around as we thought of, what's the quote right thing to do. And I think I encouraged us in the story of just, ultimately we treated the trees. That was the end of it. But, as literally today we planted new trees in our yard because those trees had to be cut down ultimately because they died. Right?
Yeah.
We treated them and they didn't survive. So, it's like, okay, well, was that wasted money? And now I think, well, maybe I should have done something differently. But gratefully, I think I don't get too caught up in past decisions like that, and unless I truly feel the conviction of God saying that was wasteful or that was not what I wanted you to do. But in the situation, we were really truly wrestling, God, what honors you? What's the right thing to do? And so we kind of made a decision on it and moved forward in what we thought was best for our neighbors, and would maybe save the trees. And all that, and then do our best not to just look back and always second guess those things, because I do think God is gracious even when the trees ultimately die and you have to take them out.
Well, and I love what you said in the book. You said, I'm not sure if we made the right decision, but I'm grateful we asked the questions.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's often contrary. You know, Spencer and I joke about, are we going to ever make a little wallet card that has my face on it that just says, stop it? I put it in my wallet that just reminds me when I open it, and it's my face saying, stop it, to remind me to stop spending. But that isn't really helpful either, because it's not asking the question. It's me trying to force on myself this idea of, if I just say stop it, it's not causing me to really trust the Lord. I have a proclivity away from asking God the question. But rather the transformation, it happens by coming before the Lord and saying, what would you have in this spending decision? Is it honoring to you? Does it show me more of yourself? Or am I just doing it to satisfy myself, my wants and my needs?
Right. Yeah. And it teaches us too, I think, to listen to God, because we do make mistakes. I mean, I when I try to listen and I try to obey, there's times when I'm not sure. Maybe that's a lack in myself, but just in all honesty, there are times when I have great comfort in a decision, and other times I'm just not there. And so, it's like, do I make a decision or do I just hold forever? And I found that God is a gentle God in disciplining even in my mistakes. And I learn a lot from those mistakes as well. And so it's not, I try not to get caught up in, this is the last chance I'm going to get if I don't get this right. And so, we've done some good things in our lifestyle, and we've done some not good things in our lifestyle. I think then we look at it again and we get back up and we say, okay, God still loves me as much as he did before. I try to think about the immutability of God, the unchangeableness of God. That means, God cannot be more loving than he already is. He cannot be less loving than he already is. He's perfectly loving. And so his love that's extended towards me isn't on this modular scale based on how I do in listening and responding. And that should actually not just say, well, it doesn't matter. It actually just bring me closer to him and say, man, I want to please God who loves me like that, unconditionally in that way. And so, man, I want to make him glad in my decisions. I want to make him happy, if you will, in how I'm living. And so that's kind of what I try to come back to as I make mistakes and try to make better decisions the next time.
Well, and I think that's one of the things we prize so much, our choice, in America, and our control. And so, whether we are controlling in that we get to make decisions to be able to take, this luxury or that luxury, or even the other side of, no, we're just going to make the choice that we're not doing that, it still almost comes back to us where we don't have a posture of listening. Like you were talking about. And I think either one of those is actually far easier for me than sitting in a posture of listening oftentimes, because, just responding and listening and being okay with, whatever the Lord may lead and not being in control, that can feel unnerving, in some ways. And I know that that's the case in some ways for our culture.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on, Spencer. It's hard to submit, hard to listen, and hard to wait. I think that's the other thing that we get in our culture, where there's so much instant satisfaction, gratification, that the waiting can be the hard part for us. It's like, I'm fine either way, just tell me. Well, waiting is your answer right now.
If you found this episode valuable, share it with a friend and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so that you don't miss the next episode.
This content was provided by Second Half Stewardship. We are in Knoxville, Tennessee, and you can visit our website at www.secondhalfstewardship.com. The information in this recording is intended for general educational and informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advisory, financial planning, legal, tax, or other professional advice based on your specific situation. Please consult your professional advisor before taking any action based on its contents.